Hello friend, welcome back. In our previous video, I have already discussed about that things with you, how can create different URL and also how can create multiple view page, right? So now in this video, I want to discuss about that URL mapping. So what is actually that URL mapping? Like if you go to our project, into this project here, you can see there I have created one of the application as a fast app application. And as I told you, you can create multiple application for your one project. But here you have to manage all that URL with only one project URL. So that is our project URL, right? So from here you have to manage it. But if you create multiple applications, like if you create that 100 application for your project, then you have to define all that your application URL with one single URL, that is our URL pattern. So then you have to create multiple URL pattern for your multiple application, which is not will be the good idea, right? So here if you want to distinguish that things, like here if you want to create another URL for a specific this application, that means here if you want to create another URL for individual this application, then you can also do that work with using that URL mapping. So in this video, I want to show you how can do that work. So right now I have already created one of the single application as a fast application, and into the fast application I have already one of the view page. So right now I want to create another URL. So here I don't want to use this URL, that means our mother URL. So here I want to create another URL for our specific this application. So if you want to create it, like here in our fast app, here I want to create another new file. So I just create as a new file, and here I want to create one of the file as a URL. Okay, I just name it as a url.file. So I just create one of the file. So now for this application, whatever the URL I want to use it in our this URLs file page. So now here we have to update our mother one, that is in our first project, that is our URL, right? So before I have already discussed about that things with you. Here I load it, so I import our views with our form app, right? So now here we don't need to use this module, because here I have already created another URL for a specific this application. So now I want to change it in particular that area. So here I have to write down as a Django. Okay, I just simply define as a Django and the conf. So I just simply define as a conf and the URLs. So I just simply define as the URLs, and here I have to input it. So I have to import our includes. So I just simply define as include. Okay, I just simply define as includes. And also right now we don't need this. Here I have created multiple page. So right now I just simply remove everything from here. And now in our path area, as I told you before, that will be our root directory, right? That means when it should be as empty, it should be getting our main page link, that is our root directory. So after that, I want to make another one. So here I want to define as a customer, whatever the URL you define. So right now I just simply define as a customer. Okay, so I just simply define as a customer. So after that customer, that means first of all it should be redirected to our this URL, and after that URL it should be redirected to our this URL as our customers, and after that customers I want to load our every page for our this application. So here we have to defining it. So here we have to change it. So right now we don't need this. Here I have to define our include. Okay, I have to include our which things. I have to include our fast app. Into the fast app I have created our URLs, right? So that's the page I have to include it on here. So I just simply include it. So I just simply define our fast app. Okay, so that means a fast underscore app, and with the fast app I have created our page is URLs. So I just simply define our URLs. Okay friend, I hope is very much clear to you. First of all, here you have to defining it, and then I just simply define our this input include. So with this include, I include our fast application. Into this fast application I have created our URLs. So I just simply load our URLs. And here if you want to use that URLs, here as I told you, first of all that will be our directory, that means our root path, and after that it should be as a slash and the customer, right? So that is our URL I have defined on here. So I just simply defining that things on particular that position. So now here we have to also update our URL, that means in our fast app. So that is our URL. So here first of all we have to also import some of the things. Like here we have to import as a form, so I just simply define as a form, and into the form, that is our here we have to include it. Okay, so I just simply copy it, and now I just simply defining it. So that will be our Django con, and the URL input. Here I want to import our URL, so I just simply define as a URL, and also I define our form, that Django. Okay, Django and URLs. So I just simply define as URLs input. So URLs input, all that our path. Okay, so here I have to add our path, so I just simply define as a path, and this path is, if you go here, you can see they have also one of the paths, so I have to also input it. So previously they have by default as a path, so I just simply define as a Django URLs and the input path, and then also I have to define that our view, right? So here I have to define, so I just simply define as a form. And in our form, I want to get our fast application. Into the fast application, that is our view, all the page, right? So now I have to also import it, that means in our fast app, and that is our views. So I just simply define as a fast, right? So that is our fast underscore app, and then I import our which things, I import our these views, right? So I just simply define as a views. So that's the same things I have defined before in our that positions, right? So now I want to actually import our this page, that means in our fast application, into the fast application, that is our view page. So I just simply from our fast app, I import our views, that means I import all that our views. Perfect. So now here I want to define that our pattern, that means our URL pattern. So I just simply define as URL and the pattern. Okay, I just simply define as URL patterns, and into the URL patterns here I have to define our path. So I just simply define that path as a path, and into this path area for our home directory, I just simply define as a home, and then I have to define our views. So I think you already know about it. Into the views, if you go to our views file, so right now that is our fast app, and that is our views, right? So into this fast app views, previously I have created some of the requests. So right now I just remove it for your better understanding. I just remove it. Here I also want to remove it. So I just simply remove everything from here. Okay, so here they have our text as a hello world, or if you want to change that our function, that is our function I have created as a home. So now I want to define as an index again. So that will be as index. So if you now go to our URLs, that means our apps, and to the URLs, that is our views. So to the views, I have already created one of the function as an index function, and then also I define that name, right? So I just simply define that name will be as also as an index. I hope it's very much clear to you what exactly the things I want to do on here. So that will be our home. Okay, and here I define our view, our index function. That means in our view I have created that index function, and here I define one of the message as a hello world. So now if you want to access it, like by default in our root, that means here I have defined our path. So our path will be our this URL, that means this URL, and after that will be our customer, right? So automatically it will be include our fast app URLs. So into the fast app URLs, I have defined our view page. So into the view, that is our views, and that is our index function. So I just simply define our index function. Now let's check this out. If you now click as a save all, and here it's showing some of the errors. So you can see that is some of the errors as a from Django URL conf URLs import. So it's not perfectly getting in our fast app. This is our li number 1. That means here there is a Django config URLs and import URL. So not the URLs. So it will be as a URL. Okay. So here I just simply define as a URL. Click on the save all again. Yeah, you can see now it's perfectly running. So now if you want to access it, that will be our directory, and here I have defined our another one. So in particular that position, after this you have to define that our customer. So now I just simply refresh it again. So now here if you run with this slash and the customer, click on the enter. Yes, now you can see friend, now it's perfectly getting our this route. So this is not actually our main one. That means right now I have created another URLs in our application. Into the application I have created it. I hope you can well understand about it right now. In particular that position, that means in our URL patterns, I define one of the path in our views. And into the views I have defined that our function as the index function. So if you go to our views, that means in our first application, that is our views, here I have defined our application function name as index, and here I define as one of the text as a hello world. So if you want to change it whatever you want, so this is from our app. Okay, so I just simply define as a, this is from our application, this type of one of the message. Click on the save all. Okay, I just click on the save all, and now if you refresh it, yeah, you can see it's now perfectly getting the data. So here if you want to add another view page, then you can also add it like I show you. If you go our view page, that is our first application, into the first application, that is our view, right? So I have already created one of the function as a index. So now I want to create another view page. So better I just simply copy it, and now in particular that position I just simply paste it. Okay, so now I want to create another function as a contact. So I just simply define as a contact, and it will be just like that same. There is a request, and that is our HTTP, and I just name it as a, this is from contact page. Okay, so this type of one of the function. So now we have to define our this function in our URL, right? So now we don't need to go our this URL. So in particular that area, that means in our application, into the application, that is our URL. So here I want to create new one. So I just simply put that comma, and here I take another one, and I just take another one, and here I name it as a contact. Okay, so I just name it as a contact. And then here I define our views. Into the views I have already defined one of the function, our function name as a contact function. See, I think step by step everything is very much clear to you what exactly the things I did on here. So that is our URL, and into the views I have created one of the function as a contact, and now I just simply define that name as a contact, right friend? So now if you want to access it, like if you want to access this contact, so first of all now we have to add our this URL first, and after that there is our in our mother I define our URL will be as a customer, right? So after that customer I include our first step URL, right? So after that customer, here I define our first step URL, that means in our first step, and that is our URL, and after that I have defined this our path, that means this one. Okay, so now if you want to check it, like here I want to copy it, and now first of all I want to save all. Yeah, everything is correct, they have no errors. So now I want to access it, click on the refresh, and after that customer I have created another URL as a contact. So now if you click as a enter, yes, now you can see friend, now it's actually getting that appropriate our this data. This is from our contact page. So in our view, that means in our view area I have defined that contact, one of the function, and into this function I return our response, that means HTTP response, and here I define as a this is from our contact page, and now it's perfectly display our contact page. So here I think you can well understand about it. So right now we don't need to add all that URL in our mother, that means in our main project URL. So here I have defined another one in our application. Now you can define all that your URL from your application. Okay friend, so now we successfully did that work. So in our next video I want to discuss about the templates. Right now I have loaded some of the text right into the view page. Here I have loaded some of the text. So here if you want to load some of the HTML page, then how can load your some of the HTML page? In our next video I will show you that things with a live example. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.